1:18 p.m. local time, high noon over the Caribbean Sea. The sky was clear, the air was calm, and the water below gave no hint that anything was about to change. Far above it, a lone U.S. Navy fighter moved steadily along its assigned route. Engines balanced, systems scanning, the pilot locked into the familiar rhythm of a routine patrol. No spectacle, no headlines, just another flight that should have ended as an ordinary entry in a mission log. Then the tone sounded. A sharp, unmistakable alert cut through the cockpit. Radar lock. Not a distant sweep, not a casual search signal. This was direct, deliberate, and focused. The kind of lock that tells a pilot the situation has just become very serious. There was no panic. Training took over at once. The pilot's eyes snapped to the threat display. Bearing confirmed. Range tightening quickly. This was no misunderstanding. Off the jet's left side, still beyond visual range, Venezuelan fighters were closing in. They were low, fast, and aggressive. And they were not following standard intercept procedure. No radio contact, no request for identification, no warning call on international frequencies, just pressure. In military aviation, there is a clear line between observing and threatening. One is a message. The other says the situation could turn in an instant, and that line had just been crossed. Inside the cockpit, the warning pulsed again. The lock was still there. At moments like this, time seems to collapse. The gap between a warning and a life-changing decision can be measured in seconds. There is no long discussion, no pause for debate, only instinct, discipline, and the knowledge that a single wrong move can turn a patrol into an international crisis. The pilot made a slight course adjustment. Not evasive, not confrontational, just enough to alter the geometry. Countermeasures were armed but not used. No flares, no jamming, not yet. Control mattered. Every second of this encounter would later be reviewed, analyzed, and replayed in detail. Outside the canopy, the Caribbean remained almost unreal in its calm. Sunlight flashed across the water, no trails in the sky, no blasts, just speed, silence, and rising tension. Then came the first visual. A Venezuelan jet tore into view, slicing across at low altitude, close enough for the pilot to make out its markings, its shape, and the heat rippling behind its engines. It was not a friendly pass. It was not cautious. It was a signal. Moments later, a second jet followed, tighter, closer, and even more forceful. To an outside observer, it might have looked like pure confidence. Two fighters pressing a single aircraft in open airspace, projecting strength, sending a message both across the region and back home. But appearances can deceive. What the Venezuelan pilots likely believed was that they were putting pressure on a lone aircraft, a single jet far from support, flying quietly over international waters. They may have assumed that getting close would be enough to shake it, that noise and proximity would translate into control. What they did not see was everything beyond the horizon. They did not see the larger network tracking the encounter in real time. They did not see the sensors watching from afar. They did not realize that every radar pulse, every radio emission, every burst of heat from their engines was being captured, logged, and stored. The closer they came, the more they exposed. Inside the American jet, the pilot remained steady. No sudden turn, no escalation, just precise handling and constant awareness. The rules were clear. Do not engage unless engaged first, do not provoke, and let the facts speak for themselves. And the facts were speaking loudly. Every aggressive move revealed something. Every lock-on added another layer to the picture. Tactics, capability, timing, limits, all of it was being laid bare. What started as harassment was becoming something else. Intelligence, delivered freely and in real time by the very side trying to apply pressure. For the Venezuelan pilots, the moment may have felt powerful. Fast passes by an American aircraft. A visible challenge, the kind of scene that could be turned into footage, into messaging, into proof of defiance. But in modern conflict, the boldest move can also be the most costly mistake. Because while they believed they were forcing the issue, they were actually stepping into a trap built not on speed or noise, but on patience, discipline, and information. By the time the second pass ended and the Venezuelan fighters began to widen their arc, nothing dramatic had happened on the surface. No weapons released, no exchange in the air, no visible flashpoint. But the balance of the encounter had already changed. What began as an attempt to intimidate had quietly turned into something far more significant. A miscalculation that would carry consequences well beyond the Caribbean sky. And the pilots making those aggressive passes did not know it yet. That was the moment they chose the wrong aircraft. From Caracas, the decision likely looked deliberate. In the days leading up to the encounter, Venezuelan military activity across the Caribbean had been quietly increasing. There were more patrols, more flight hours, more visible activity in the air. It was not a build-up for open war. It was signaling, a deliberate reminder that Venezuela still wanted to project importance in a region largely shaped by American air and naval presence. The fighters that moved toward the U.S. aircraft were not there by chance. They had been directed in, guided by controllers on the ground who were looking at the same radar picture, reading the same tracks, and calculating the same intercept angles. This was not an improvised pass. It was a controlled test, a pressure move meant to draw a response without tipping into outright confrontation. At least that was the intention. The problem was in the way they carried it out. A standard intercept usually follows an understood pattern. Identify the aircraft, communicate, keep safe separation, and prevent the situation from escalating. Even rivals respect that structure because the alternative is chaos at extreme speed. Here, that script was ignored. The Venezuelan jets came in fast, low, and close enough to set off unmistakable warning tones in the American cockpit. One of them shifted from search radar into tracking mode again, briefly but clearly, and that detail mattered. A radar lock is more than a technical step. It is a message. In military aviation, it means, I have you within my options. Even without a launch, the intent behind it is hard to misread. And intent is exactly what rules of engagement are built to judge. Inside the American cockpit, the threat receiver confirmed what the pilot already understood. This had moved beyond routine harassment. The situation was escalating. Even so, the response stayed disciplined. No countermeasures released, no jamming, no abrupt brake turn that could be mistaken for fear or aggression. The aircraft held its course, made a slight altitude adjustment, and maintained speed. The pilot's grip remained light, posture steady, breathing under control, because these encounters are often designed to provoke an emotional reaction, and emotion is exactly what professionals are trained to deny. From the Venezuelan side, it probably felt forceful and effective. Their aircraft had the visual edge. They were closer, louder, and more dramatic. For a home audience, that kind of image carries weight. Fighters confronting an American jet, a display of sovereignty, a moment of visible defiance. But air combat is not theater. Every second they remained close. Every system they activated, every maneuver they flew was being measured. Modern military aircraft are not only weapons platforms, they are flying sensor suites. And when two fighters come this close, they are not merely watching each other, they are collecting information. During one pass, the Venezuelan pilots briefly lit their afterburners, punching through the heavy Caribbean air. The heat bloom flared behind them, obvious even to the eye. On infrared systems, it stood out instantly. Their radios snapped with short, clipped calls back to controllers ashore. Not casual chatter, but quick updates, headings, and tasking. Every transmission added another piece to an expanding profile. This is the part most people never notice. Beneath the visible encounter is the invisible one. Radar frequencies, pulse behavior, communication rhythm, reaction time to instructions, how tightly formations hold together under stress. Those details matter far more than dramatic flybys. Inside the U.S. aircraft, systems were quietly recording it all. Not with theatrics, not with overreaction, but with calm precision. There was no need to chase, no need to threaten in return. The Venezuelan aircraft were exposing everything on their own. One of the fighters cut in even tighter on the second pass, crossing closer than before. Close enough for wake turbulence to brush the American jet. Close enough that a tiny mistake, a slight overcorrection, a single misjudged movement could have turned the encounter into disaster at combined speeds well above 1,000 miles per hour. That was the moment the line became impossible to miss. This was no longer just a show of presence. It had become a contest of control, an attempt to force the American pilot to react first, to flinch, to yield, to show pressure had worked. And that is where the real miscalculation was made. Because the U.S. military does not measure strength by volume or proximity. It measures strength by composure, by how well crews operate under pressure, and by how much the other side reveals when it thinks it is in command. The American jet did not peel away, it did not turn and run. It did not escalate. It simply remained on station. That restraint sent its own message, and it was a far more unsettling one. It said, "We are not rattled. We are observing." As the Venezuelan formation widened again and moved outward to reset, the encounter ended not with a blast or a warning shot, but with silence. Yet by then, the real exchange had already happened. Venezuela had tried to use aggression as leverage. Instead, it had exposed its tactics, its routines, and its limitations to a system built to absorb pressure and convert it into advantage. And the pilots involved still believed the moment was over. They had no way of knowing that what had just happened would shape everything that followed. From the outside, it looked like restraint. No flares, no warning shots, no hard pursuit. Just an American jet holding its course while Venezuelan fighters circled, pressed in, and eventually drifted back. To an untrained eye, it might even have seemed hesitant, almost passive. It was neither. It was intentional. Modern military aviation is not only about what a pilot sees through the canopy, it is also about what the aircraft is quietly gathering every second in the background. And during those tense minutes above the Caribbean, the American jet was doing exactly what it had been built to do. Every radar sweep that touched the airframe, every radio transmission that broke across open channels, every spike of heat from engines pushed beyond normal margins, all of it was being captured. The Venezuelan pilots believed closeness meant control, that the nearer they flew, the more dominance they projected. But in reality, proximity creates exposure. The closer an aircraft gets, the more clearly its signature can be read. And those signatures are like fingerprints, distinct, measurable, and impossible to take back once they have been recorded. When the Venezuelan fighters changed radar modes, even for a moment, they revealed far more than they likely intended. Radar is not just a signal, it is a language. Pulse rhythm, frequency changes, scan patterns, all of it tells a story. To trained analysts, those details can reveal what system is being used, how it is configured, and how it performs under pressure. That kind of information matters. The American aircraft did not need to answer with jamming or return a lock of its own. It did not need to fill the sky with countermeasures. Silence was enough. The calmer one side remained, the more the other side exposed itself. As the Venezuelan jets maneuvered, their formation loosened slightly. Small spacing errors, tiny timing differences, the kind of flaws that never appear in polished footage, but stand out immediately to experienced observers. Those details said more than any dramatic pass ever could. They hinted at training standards, command discipline, and real operational readiness. Then there was the heat. At one point, one of the Venezuelan pilots pushed the engines harder, either to hold position or to make the moment feel more forceful. The afterburner glow lasted only briefly, but on infrared sensors, it stood out clearly. Temperature patterns, exhaust spread, throttle response, each one added another clue to the growing picture. None of this required direct confrontation. The American jet remained steady, recording, measuring, remembering. Every onboard system was doing exactly what it had been designed to do. This was not really a duel, it was a diagnosis. And the Venezuelan pilots never realized they were the ones being studied. When they finally widened their arc and pulled back to a safer distance, they likely felt they had made their point. They had flown aggressively, they had forced attention, they had shown they were willing to challenge a U.S. aircraft in open airspace. But the truth was much less flattering. They had given away something far more valuable than a brief moment of intimidation. They had revealed how they operate when pressure builds, how they maneuver, how they communicate, how their systems react when pushed. In any modern standoff, that kind of insight is extremely valuable. This is the part that rarely becomes a headline. There is no dramatic footage to replay, no explosive moment to loop on screen, just data, quiet, precise, and permanent, stored, reviewed, and shared across a network far larger than any single aircraft in the sky. By the time the Venezuelan jets turned back, the encounter was already over in the only way that truly mattered. The American pilot continued the mission exactly as planned, steady, professional, unshaken. No sudden deviation, no visible disruption, just a clean continuation of flight. But far from the Caribbean, analysts would soon begin breaking down everything that had been collected. Not emotionally, not politically, methodically. They would look at which systems were active and which were not. How quickly the pilots reacted to cues, where hesitation appeared, where confidence held, and where it started to thin. Patterns emerge in moments like these, and patterns are what militaries prepare for. The Venezuelan pilots may have believed they were confronting a single aircraft. In reality, they had engaged something much larger, a system built to reward patience and exploit impulsiveness. By choosing intimidation over disengagement, they stepped into a space where every movement became useful information. And once that information is gathered, it does not disappear. Soon, the Caribbean sky returned to calm. The aircraft separated. The moment seemed to pass. But the consequences did not. Because from that point on, the real balance of the encounter was no longer about who flew closer or louder. It was about who understood more. From the outside, it seemed like nothing had really happened. No weapons were released, no urgent press statements followed, and no wave of headlines suddenly took over the news. The Venezuelan jets pulled away, the American aircraft stayed on its route, and the Caribbean sky slipped back into its usual calm. But a lack of visible reaction does not mean there was no response at all. In modern military operations, the most important actions often happen far from public view. Within minutes of the encounter ending, the information gathered during those close passes was already moving through secure channels. Not with drama, not with panic, just with speed and precision. Radar records, infrared imagery, fragments of radio traffic, exact timestamps, position data, all of it organized, preserved, and sent to places the Venezuelan pilots would never see. That is what restraint looks like when it is backed by real capability. The American pilot filed a standard report. No exaggeration, no emotion, only the facts, times, headings, distances, system activity, aircraft behavior, every detail that mattered and nothing extra. That report was only one part of a much larger picture. The jet over the Caribbean was never operating in isolation. It was one piece of a layered network built to absorb pressure without reacting impulsively. Sensors in the air, at sea, and beyond the atmosphere all fed into the same system. What one platform detected, another could confirm. What one sensor captured, another could compare. The Venezuelan pilots may have thought they were confronting a single aircraft. In reality, they were engaging an entire structure, and structures like that do not respond emotionally. Instead of a loud reaction, posture shifted quietly. Patrol patterns were adjusted. Coverage windows were refined. Contingency plans were reviewed, not as an act of panic, but as part of ongoing readiness. Nothing dramatic needed to be invented. The framework already existed. It was simply strengthened. This is where many adversaries misread the situation. They expect a response to look visible, loud, and immediate. They look for force displayed in ways cameras can capture. But for a professional military, response is not about spectacle. It is about position, awareness, and staying one step ahead. The American aircraft kept flying. So did others. Not as a show, not in some dramatic formation, but as a steady and consistent presence. Quiet, reliable, and always there in the way that matters most. The encounter itself was brief, but it did not vanish. It became a reference point, a fresh data set, another entry in a long record used to sharpen understanding of regional behavior. Nothing about it was wasted. Elsewhere, the information gathered began feeding into training, planning, and future assessments, not just for the next day, but for the long term. Because what matters most is not how a force behaves when everything is comfortable. It is how it acts under pressure when time is short and instinct takes over. That was the part the Venezuelan pilots had revealed. From their point of view, the absence of an immediate visible reaction may have felt like a win. No aircraft rushed in to answer them. No aggressive pursuit followed. No public condemnation dominated the conversation. It may have looked as if the Americans had simply let it pass. They had not. They had documented it. The discipline shown by the U.S. pilot was not accidental. It is trained, repeated, and expected. Every aviator understands that staying controlled under pressure is not weakness. It is command of the situation. It keeps choices open. It reduces the chance of error. And it often pushes the other side to reveal more than it intended. That is exactly what happened here. There were no dramatic flybys in return, no sudden moves designed to grab attention, because attention was never the goal. Understanding was. As the days went on, nothing on the surface appeared to change. Flights continued. Patrols continued. The region remained stable, at least outwardly. That sense of normal routine is part of the strategy itself. When presence becomes expected, intimidation starts to lose its effect. And that was where the real shift took place. By refusing to escalate, the U.S. side denied Venezuela the result it was likely hoping for. Drama, recognition, and a visible reaction. Instead, the entire event was reduced to what it truly was, a recorded encounter, stripped of emotion and stripped of theater. But that does not mean it was unimportant. It mattered because in future encounters, the information collected here would influence decisions. It would shape judgments about acceptable risk. It would help define how close is too close, and when silence carries more weight than speed or noise. The Venezuelan pilots walked away believing they had pushed the line without consequence. In reality, they had pushed it just far enough to be carefully studied. And the response they never witnessed, the quiet adjustments, the heightened awareness, the sharper understanding, was already underway. All of it happened without a single aircraft breaking formation and without a single weapon leaving its rail. In the end, no one opened fire. No wreckage fell into the sea. No pilot had to abandon an aircraft. No emergency meeting took over the headlines. On the surface, the encounter faded almost as quickly as it appeared. And in that exchange, the advantage had shifted decisively, without a single shot being fired. A few tense minutes over international waters, then distance, then silence. From the outside, it looked like a moment that came and went. But that is not how militaries judge outcomes. What matters is not what happened in public view. What matters is what changed afterward. For Venezuela, the encounter was meant to project resolve, a visible signal that its air force could still challenge American presence in the Caribbean. For a domestic audience, it was supposed to show determination, proof that their pilots were ready to press in, fly close, and apply pressure. But pressure without leverage is only noise. By choosing intimidation over professionalism, the Venezuelan pilots revealed more than they likely realized. They showed how their aircraft perform near the edge of their limits, how their formations begin to loosen when tension rises, and how their communication patterns shift when decisions have to be made in seconds. These are not small details, they are operational facts. For the United States, the encounter reinforced a lesson learned many times over decades of close aerial standoffs. Restraint, when backed by real capability, creates an uneven balance. It pushes the other side to act, to transmit, to expose itself. The side that stays quiet gathers insight. The side that creates the noise gives insight away. This was never about proving who could dominate the sky in a dramatic moment. It was about avoiding that kind of confrontation altogether and still leaving with the advantage. The American pilot did exactly what doctrine demands. He did not chase drama. He did not look for validation. He held course, stayed disciplined, and allowed the situation to reveal itself. That decision kept escalation off the table while preserving every option if the situation had shifted further. That kind of balance is not easy. It takes confidence not only in the aircraft, but in the entire system behind it. Confidence that you are supported. Confidence that discipline will be understood for what it is. Confidence that staying calm is not the same as giving ground. The Venezuelan pilots, by contrast, placed their bet on proximity. They believed that getting closer meant gaining control. But in modern air operations, closeness can just as easily become vulnerability. It compresses time, magnifies mistakes, and turns every action into usable information. And once that information exists, it cannot be taken back. From that point on, every future encounter would be shaped by what was learned in those minutes over the Caribbean. Not emotionally, not politically. Practically, quietly, and permanently. That is why this became a mistake. Not because it almost triggered a wider crisis. It did not. But because it created clarity where uncertainty once existed. And uncertainty is often one of the few advantages a weaker force can still hold. There is a reason professional militaries emphasize de-escalation, standardized intercepts, and clear communication. Those procedures are not about courtesy. They are about keeping fast-moving situations from turning into irreversible ones. When those rules are ignored, even briefly, the cost rarely appears in the moment. It shows up later, in planning rooms, in exercises, and in future encounters where the space for surprise has become smaller than before. That day, the Caribbean sky returned to calm. Ships kept moving, patrols continued. On paper, almost nothing seemed different. In reality, everything had shifted. Because one side learned and the other side revealed. And in modern military competition, that imbalance only grows with time. So the real question lingers long after the aircraft are gone from sight. When provocation comes fast and close, is real strength found in reacting or in remaining completely steady? This time, the answer was written without spectacle, without dramatic gestures, and without public noise. It was written in discipline. A few tense minutes over international waters, then distance, then silence. From the outside, it looked like a moment that came and went. But that is not how militaries judge outcomes. What matters is not what happened in public view. What matters is what changed afterward. For Venezuela, the encounter was meant to project resolve, a visible signal that its air force could still challenge American presence in the Caribbean. For a domestic audience, it was supposed to show determination, proof that their pilots were ready to press in, fly close, and apply pressure. But pressure without leverage is only noise. By choosing intimidation over professionalism, the Venezuelan pilots revealed more than they likely realized. They showed how their aircraft perform near the edge of their limits, how their formations begin to loosen when tension rises, and how their communication patterns shift when decisions have to be made in seconds. These are not small details. They are operational facts. For the United States, the encounter reinforced a lesson learned many times over decades of close aerial standoffs. Restraint, when backed by real capability, creates an uneven balance. It pushes the other side to act, to transmit, to expose itself. The side that stays quiet gathers insight. The side that creates the noise gives insight away. This was never about proving who could dominate the sky in a dramatic moment. It was about avoiding that kind of confrontation altogether and still leaving with the advantage. The American pilot did exactly what doctrine demands. He did not chase drama. He did not look for validation. He held course, stayed disciplined, and allowed the situation to reveal itself. That decision kept escalation off the table while preserving every option if the situation had shifted further. That kind of balance is not easy. It takes confidence, not only in the aircraft, but in the entire system behind it. Confidence that you are supported. Confidence that discipline will be understood for what it is. Confidence that staying calm is not the same as giving ground. The Venezuelan pilots, by contrast, placed their bet on proximity. They believed that getting closer meant gaining control. But in modern air operations, closeness can just as easily become vulnerability. It compresses time, magnifies mistakes, and turns every action into usable information. And once that information exists, it cannot be taken back. From that point on, every future encounter would be shaped by what was learned in those minutes over the Caribbean. Not emotionally, not politically, practically, quietly, and permanently. That is why this became a mistake. Not because it almost triggered a wider crisis. It did not. But because it created clarity where uncertainty once existed. And uncertainty is often one of the few advantages a weaker force can still hold. There is a reason professional militaries emphasize de-escalation, standardized intercepts, and clear communication. Those procedures are not about courtesy. They are about keeping fast-moving situations from turning into irreversible ones. When those rules are ignored, even briefly, the cost rarely appears in the moment. It shows up later, in planning rooms, in exercises, and in future encounters where the space for surprise has become smaller than before. That day, the Caribbean sky returned to calm. Ships kept moving, patrols continued. On paper, almost nothing seemed different. In reality, everything had shifted. Because one side learned and the other side revealed. And in modern military competition, that imbalance only grows with time. So the real question lingers long after the aircraft are gone from sight. When provocation comes fast and close, is real strength found in reacting or in remaining completely steady? This time, the answer was written without spectacle, without dramatic gestures, and without public noise. It was written in discipline.